I'm Grady Culhane in the CapeCod.com News Center. Welcome to Sunday Journal. I'm joined today by a special guest, a candidate for the Cape and Islands State Senate seat. We are going to be chatting with all the candidates for State Senate this year. Do you mind just introducing yourself for our listeners?
Hey, Grady. It's good to be with you. This is Julian Cyr, and I think you and listeners, I hope you know me by now. I've been serving as state senator for the Cape and Islands District since 2017, but lifelong Cape Codder. I grew up in Truro. My family had a seasonal restaurant in Truro. Grew up waiting on tables, spending more years of my life serving people and working behind the line than anything else I've done. In recent years, ran for state senate in 2016. Probably was an unlikely candidate at the time. Was the first time, 29 years old, first time candidate from the smallest town on Cape Cod. But we worked really hard. Had a really groundswell of support. Knocked 20,000 doors. Won a competitive primary. Won a competitive general. I've actually had competitive races. I think every cycle except 2020. But I've been working hard for Cape Codders and Islanders, and really proud of. Really proud of my record, and I'm proud of what I've been able to deliver for the region. We face really big challenges, right? From housing to the climate crisis to wastewater, access to health services in this geographically isolated region, right? Lots and lots of big challenges, and I've been really honored to really play a role in solving some of those, and made some real progress on it, and glad to get into it.
Yeah, we're going to be touching on a lot of topics today. We only have about 25 minutes, so we're gonna try and keep it grooving a little bit. But first things first, you've already mentioned it, of course, is the major housing issues the Cape and Islands region is facing. Nantucket with its red-hot real estate market, record sales as of late. We are having, we have the housing summit, so we have state officials coming down to kind of examine the issue closely. You're part of that summit too. Do you mind talking a little bit about how you feel you've done handling with housing as of late, some of the stuff you've been involved in?
So this has been, a crisis in the region for 20 years since I was in high school, but really the pandemic put our real estate market on steroids, right? Mm-hmm. In the 8 years that I've been state senator, we've seen over 100% increase in median home prices here on Cape Cod, more on Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, the extremities of the region, the Outer Cape, Provincetown, where I live, right, has really gotten to a point where if you are not someone who owns a home or is going to inherit a home, right, as a working year-round person, you can't afford to buy a home, and you're probably really challenged to find an affordable place to rent. And so housing, this housing crisis was part of the reason why I ran for state senate in the first place in 2016, right? If Cape Codders, if Islanders of our generation, right, are not not invested in the future of this place, we're not going to have a future. And we've been working very doggedly on housing, with Governor Healy and the Healy-Driscoll administration. Spent a ton of time getting them down here and spending time, just earlier this month was on Nantucket for the whole day with our housing secretary, and really sort of focusing on the challenges that we're facing. So what we did is we surveyed all the towns in the Cape and Islands District, and we said, hey, what are the tools, what are the policies, what are the revenue sources that you need to solve that problem? And from that list, we came up with a number of things that our towns are asking us to do. Our towns are asking us to have the ability to be able to subsidize housing above area median income, right, for year-round workers. Towns are asking us for the ability to provide housing for their municipal workers, the ability to have year-round deed restrictions, right, to preserve year-round housing, right, and take it off that seasonal market. Towns are asking us, 12 of the 19 towns in the Cape and Islands District are asking for a transfer fee on luxury real estate transactions to fund all this work. And so we packaged this all together into something we called a seasonal communities policy or a seasonal communities designation. The governor proposed it in her bill. The House supported it in the Affordable Homes Act when they took it up. And then in the Senate, we worked to flesh out that policy even further. It made it into the final $5.1 billion housing bond bill. Was one of the 49 policies in there. The governor signed it into law, and this is game changer policy for the Cape and Islands, right? The Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce has called this, very significant policy for addressing the biggest business issue that we face, right? Housing advocates have worked with us to put these policies in place, and we listened to our towns from across the region and really delivered the tools. So I'm really excited about this seasonal communities designation. This is going to enable us to begin the work of what we have to do is figure out a way to subsidize housing to sustain a year-round community. We still have work to do. We were not able to get the transfer fee signed into into the bill, and we're coming back on this, right? Transfer fee is a really artful way to generate revenue from multi-million-dollar real estate transactions that are purchases from second, third, fourth homeowners, people who probably even live out of state. Transfer fees are widely used across the United States. Most states have some form of a transfer fee. Actually, we have a transfer fee on Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket that's been quite successful in funding their land conservation and land bank. So we've been making the case on this, and this is sort of a homework assignment, work to be continued. Made quite a bit of progress, though, right? Governor Healy supports this. Lieutenant Governor supports this. 12 of the 19 towns have passed home rules or resolutions at town meeting asking the legislature to take action here. So that's what I'm planning to do to come back on this. But I'm going to be dogged on our housing issue. I mean, I'm living this myself, right? I'm someone who rents. I've really sort of given up. I'm not really given up, but it's no. In some ways, you do give up, right? I mean, do you afford the median home price in Truro, in my hometown? A household has to make $400,000 a year. I mean, that's out of reach of almost everyone I know, right? So we've got a real crisis here. I'm really encouraged by, the real collaborative approach we've taken on the Cape and Islands. This seasonal community designation was a bipartisan approach. Democrats, Republicans worked on it. The business community, our housing advocates, municipal officials, all sort of pulling in the same direction. And when we have this kind of policy approach on the Cape, we've really had success in it, right? The other model of this, of course, has been wastewater, right? Which is of course tied into housing, right? You can't have the denser housing in our existing villages that we need if you don't have wastewater infrastructure. And by the way, you can't, preserve our fragile environment when you have, over 90% of estuaries and embayments and ponds and lakes on Cape Cod are impaired by nitrogen, by our failure to address wastewater. So, that's why the Cape Cod and Islands delegation in 2018, with Sarah Peake and me in the lead, wrote the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund. 4 years into the life of that fund has generated $204 million in other people's money for wastewater projects in 8 towns across the Cape, right? We're seeing towns like Yarmouth and Dennis this fall voting to support wastewater after years and years of struggling to get this done. And I think a big part of that is now that we have this Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund providing a 25% subsidy, right? Taking 25% off the cost of these projects, which are tens of millions of dollars. So this has been a big deal, and again has been, this collaborative approach that I think we have taken here that has been quite successful in delivering for the region.
Yeah, I mean, you've already read my mind. The water was definitely the next topic. But so you're saying you have a proven track record, though, is kind of like your main takeaway from the water issues. Do we have more to do?
We've got a lot more to do on housing. We've got more to do, especially in implementation of wastewater. So the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund is a revenue source, right? Putting these very costly projects within greater reach, right, for Cape Codders. The other pieces we've tried to focus on are what are the other kind of costs in the ecosystem of cleaning up, cleaning up our effluent. A nicer word
Not
for maybe another word.
We're dancing around various topics today, Julian. But yeah, carry
no
on.
dancing. Just trying not to get the radio
factor.
station in trouble by saying a certain colorful word. But another place we focused is looking at the septic tax credit. I never thought I'd spend so much time talking about effluent, should we say. So we did historic tax reform in 2023, and the piece I focused on was tripling an existing septic tax credit. So we had an existing tax credit in law for up to $6,000 for upgrades to a septic system. I led the charge to triple that tax credit up to $18,000. not only for upgrading your septic system to a newer septic system or an alternative system, but we included language to encompass sewer hookups. So, across Cape Cod, you have Orleans, you have Yarmouth, you have Dennis, you have Barnstable, all that are having sewer projects, and there's cost with the hookup, right? Hooking up to the sewer, that can be $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 for a homeowner. The tax credit now applies to that, right? So this is, again, savings and trying to really figure out how this all pencils out. This tax reform and tax relief, I think, is a pretty big deal. We did it a year ago, so folks might have forgotten about it, but it was $1 billion in tax relief focused on middle income and low income residents here in Massachusetts, and it's benefiting families, across the region. We doubled the senior citizen circuit tax break. We looked, and I really led the way in pushing for reform of the estate tax. The estate tax level in Massachusetts was at $1 million. It's pretty easy to have $1 million estate if you've been living on Cape Cod for a little while, right? Maybe you bought a house for $100,000 a couple decades ago. Now it's worth over $1 million, right? We raised that to $2 million. I led the charge on that. Other provisions as well, more than doubling the child and family tax credit from $180 to $400. We lifted the cap. There was a cap on how many children or dependents you could deduct. We lifted that. So this has really been part of an effort to try to get at the real cost of living that we face, right? But of course, the biggest cost of living, especially on Cape Cod and the islands, it's housing, right? And so that's why we've got to stay laser focused, and I'm laser focused on housing.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, as well, while I have you, I wanted to touch on some of the other, these are things that are more community focused. So this is now the transportation. I wanted to talk about the bridges with you. We got the Sagamore Bridge funded, and that impacts a lot of things like commerce and, of course, transportation for the seasonal economy, getting visitors on Cape to spend money and stay at our local hospitality industries. But also, right now, we're still waiting on Bourne Bridge funding. Kind of wanted to get a read on you of what you've been up to, how you've been playing into that, and what's the next step.
So this is a really big deal. And it's also, I think, reflective of the collaborative approach that we have across the state and our state and federal government, our federal delegation, Senator Warren, Senator Markey, Congressman Keating, being really dogged around getting federal funding. When Governor Healy came in, we had lost out on grant applications for funding for the bridges under the prior administration. The governor overhauled the approach. We worked collaboratively to bring more state resources to the project. And we got really serious about making the case for, the significant federal money that's out there. By the way, thanks to Joe Biden and the Biden-Harris administration and Vice President Harris, in the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. And we have been quite successful. So I think over $1.7 billion in federal monies are coming to replace the Sagamore Bridge with state resources. The Sagamore Bridge is fully funded. This is a monumental achievement and is very, very significant. Now we have to work to secure dollars and resources for the Bourne Bridge. I'll be honest, I think our biggest impediment to getting federal resources here is the outcome of this presidential election. And I'm pretty confident that if the Republican candidate, if Donald Trump becomes the next president, we will not see another penny to come to Massachusetts for these bridges, for other infrastructure projects. So that's really the biggest risk that I really see in having our very effective congressional delegation working with our governor, working, of course, with the leaders we have here, all pulling in the same direction to get the Bourne Bridge funded. So, I think if we have, and of course I'm rooting for a Harris administration for a lot of reasons, but particularly around getting additional funding for the Bourne Bridge. If that doesn't happen, I think we're going to have to get creative. I think we're going to have to look at other state resources. I think we're going to have to go back to the feds and try to figure this out. But these bridges really operate as an ecosystem, and that we need both a replacement of the Sagamore Bridge and the Bourne Bridge. And this is just an essential priority. Now more than ever, relating back, not to go back to housing every time, right? But
it's all connected.
Because of the housing crisis, right? So many of the people who are working on Cape Cod are commuting from off Cape because they can't live here, right? We think about a third of our workforce or more commuting each and every day, not to mention our visitors, not to mention, goods and services. So getting these bridges replaced and funded because they're federal bridges is absolutely essential, and it's going to remain a top priority, for all the serious collaborative leaders that we have in the region.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to put a pin as well in the topics about the possible election outcomes and how it might impact some local stuff for later as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about how you feel, what sets you apart from your opponent. But another major topic I wanted to touch on right here is actually climate change, particularly with offshore wind. We've been seeing a lot more development towards like green, blue economy stuff. So I want to ask you how you're feeling as of late. Of course, we're now in the wake of the turbine failure with Vineyard Wind, unfortunately, but that has slowly been remediated. So where are we at in terms of offshore wind, green investments, the 2035, stopping to sell combustion engine vehicles? Do you think we need to press harder? Are we going a little bit too hard? Where are your stances on that so far?
So Massachusetts has had, again, a real bipartisan approach to, tackling the climate crisis and being really honest about the situation that we are in, which is not good. We are quite literally, leaving the next generation a planet that is, maybe just a catastrophe or potentially unlivable. And for Cape Codders and Islanders who are living in a place where our waters in the Gulf of Maine, which is, basically Cape Cod Bay is the south of it, right? The Gulf of Maine, our waters are warming faster than almost anywhere else in the world. They're rising faster. They're acidifying faster, right? So we have if we want to be able to continue to live at Land's End, if we want to live on our islands, we have to take this really seriously. And so that involves a whole host of things. Yes, it involves coastal resilience and really making some tough choices about what do we buttress, what can we shore up, what do we have to abandon. The governor has a Resilience Coast Task Force that I'm serving on and a member of, and really working hard there. And it also is around moving away from carbon-based fuels and including our electricity. And so, I think Cape Codders and Islanders need to remember that, when you turn the lights on or powered this radio station up until very recently, you turn those lights on, the power came from either Brayton Point, which was a coal electricity plant just outside of Fall River, a dirty coal plant, or it came from Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station, which was this corroding facility that we all worked so hard to close because it posed, a potential catastrophic risk. And so there's been a real bipartisan push, first from Governor Patrick, really, then continued by Governor Baker and really advanced by Governor Baker, who approved the Vineyard Wind project, and then now continued by Governor Healy, that I think, really makes sense that if we're gonna power our lives on renewable energy, offshore wind is definitely a part of that mix, as is solar, as is hydropower. And I think broadly we should be proud of really leading the country on this. Look, there's been some rougher waters. The blade failure this summer of the GE Vernova Vineyard Wind blade was unacceptable. And the initial response was really unacceptable, right? This is the blade that failed, I think, on a Saturday afternoon, evening. And the island of Nantucket wasn't notified about this. I wasn't notified about this. We weren't notified about this until, Monday afternoon into the evening. That's unacceptable, right? We need offshore wind developers to be good neighbors to Islanders and to Cape Codders who are, hosting these projects in our waters. There's been a little closer to the mainland. There's been recent kind of concern and sort of newfound opposition to subsequent proposed projects. I think the facts are really important here when it comes to offshore wind. The town of Barnstable has been leading the way here, and the town of Barnstable is who recruited the offshore wind projects initially to come and land in the town. Vineyard Wind originally was looking to go to Yarmouth. They were looking to potentially go up Cape. And it was the town of Barnstable under a Republican-led town council under the late Jimmy Crocker and others who, essentially went to the Vineyard Wind project and said, hey, look, we think you should land your cables here in Barnstable. We've got a $1 billion sewer problem. While you're ripping up the roads to lay the cable conduit, let's lay the sewers. That was something the town of Barnstable came to us and wanted us to support. And so, at that time, and I've really been taking my cue from the town of Barnstable, from municipal leaders. The town has voted, in their town council to support 2 host community agreements. Yes, for Vineyard Wind, now for a subsequent project, that they actually just voted to approve, at Craigville Beach as well as Covels. Unclear if the Dowses Beach project, which is sort of the most opposition to, moves forward. I actually think it probably doesn't. It was not awarded a bid. The administration did not select it to move forward in this current round of funding. So look, we've got to be vigilant. We've got to make sure that these projects are are good neighbors, that they're benefiting Cape Codders and Islanders, that there's jobs that are coming here, that we're being good stewards of our marine environment. But I think we need to be clear about the facts about how we got here. And really what I've been doing is working to take my cue from the municipalities I represent, to work in partnership with them. I know that constituents have questions about these projects, right? And we've got to make sure that we're answering those questions. I'm someone who got my start in public health. I worked at the Department of Public Health for a number of years before doing this job. There's nothing more unhelpful or disrespectful than discounting concerns that folks may have about magnetic radiation exposure or threats to our aquifer. And so what I've tried to do is just get answers to those questions. In the FY25 budget, I funded a $150,000 study to look at the effect of electrical transmission from cables to water and to our aquifer. Made sure the Department of Public Health and the Department of Public Utilities was down here in Barnstable at Covell's Beach doing magnetic testing so we could look at what the readings were now that the Vineyard Wind Project had started putting energy to the grid. So that's the approach that I've really taken, is to support, take my cue from the towns, to support them. But broadly, I think we should be proud to be leading the nation in offshore wind. And I think is something that, makes a lot of sense, both from the climate crisis and in also getting renewable and stably priced energy in a state where we have some of the highest electric costs in the country.
Mm-hmm. All right, now we're about coming up on time, unfortunately, but I wanted to ask you. This is where we're gonna get excited. I want to ask you kind of what you feel sets you apart from your opponent, if there has been any communications that you feel you would like to respond to, or any other kind of like direct kind of debate topics, essentially.
I mean, look, I think Chris and I actually have a lot in common, right? We're Cape Codders who grew up here, who care about our communities. I think the piece I've been sort of disappointed in is I think in a bit of a bid to get some attention, the Lauzon camp has just been putting stuff out there that's not true. Saying things that, that my record has been a disaster for the residents of our district and outright harmful to our way of life. That's a direct quote. Like I don't know what he's talking about. Like, does he not like the child and family tax credit increase we made, or the investments in wastewater, or the focus on housing? We've just had such a nastiness in our national politics that, has been really unfortunate. And I've been sort of witness to, right? I was first elected in 2016, right? The same night that Donald Trump was elected president. And, I just think that it's not productive on Cape Cod and the islands, where I think we've really said no to that kind of nastiness of campaigning and politics. I think Chris said once, that our state senator, that me, always puts his personal point of view ahead of what's needed on the Cape and Islands. This is kind of a classic dog whistle that folks use against LGBTQ people like me, who are elected officials, right? It's just that's the kind of stuff that, saying I have an anti-resident agenda. Look at my record. I mean, I have been laser focused on delivering for Cape Codders and Islanders on the toughest issues we faced. I've done it working with Democrats, independents, Republicans, even with the legislature, which can get quite dysfunctional. I've gotten things done. And so, I think that's just sort of the sort of biggest contrast. But, look, I think competitive races are good for our democracy. I think it makes me a better candidate and a better state senator, right, when we have good-spirited debates. So I just that's kind of my ask, is that let's leave that nasty politics on the other side of the Cape Cod Canal, because that's not how we do things on the Cape and Islands. I think one of the most important lessons that I learned when I came into this position, early on, was seeing how folks like Sarah Peake and Randy Hunt and Tim Whalen, would all work together, right? And how, Vinny DiMacedo, right? Democrats, Republicans, all pulling in the same direction. There's only 8 of us that represent the Cape and Islands in the legislature. And that kind of collaborative bipartisan approach, for me, that was just a really important lesson to learn early on in doing this work. And it's something I've really, sought to exemplify and to keep at it. So, but again, as we close, certainly I'm asking Cape Codders and Islanders for their vote once again on November 5th. You should make a plan to vote, right? Think about how you're going to vote. You're going to vote on November 5th. You vote by mail. You vote early. And also, if you have questions about my record, you want to see what I'm up to, we try really hard to be very transparent about what I'm doing. If you could visit senatorcyr.com, every month we put out a monthly newsletter where you can track and say, all right, what has Julian been up to? What is he working on? What does he think on this issue or that issue? And so, for voters who have questions, want to look at my record, you don't have to take it from me. You can watch what we're up to, and just really, again, asking voters for their support once again to represent this most special region in our state government.
All right, Julian, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. It has been a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Grady. Take care.
I'm Grady Culhane, the CapeCod.com News Center, and thank you for listening.